From the land down under, with the rock at its centre, comes the little Aussie Watchman. My blood is boiling. At every single school event, the small Victorian school of which my unfortunate children have to attend, we now have to perform incessant virtue signalling. We need to recognise, apparently, the original custodians of the land and pay respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, prior to any and every school event. I've had enough. If you don't know what virtue signalling is, it is when people do things in public to show how good or politically correct they are. Things that usually do very little to actually help the cause for which they are virtue signalling. Because helping the cause is not the point of virtue signalling, it is show how wonderful you are. I'm not saying that acknowledging the local Aboriginal people is necessarily a bad thing. It is just the continued, repetitive, incessant and brain-numbingly politically correct verbal diarrhoea from those not even of Aboriginal descent has about as much worth as feathers on a fish. If we were to recognise the past, then what about recognising Captain Cook for sailing to Australia? About King George III, who was the monarch during that time? Or more importantly, Jesus Christ and the God of the universe for whom all our prosperity and freedom finds its origins? What about our history? About celebrating the good things that were the foundation for Western civilization? Due to the guilt of past misdeeds in our country, we are now encumbered with what is essentially a useless waste of 5 minutes of virtue signalling. I have taken to metaphorically putting my head in my hands and muttering incomprehensible sounds of pain and suffering. What good does it do for us? What does it demonstrate? Is it an apology? It is clearly not an apology, but a cultural spiritual nod to a whole society who remained in a very primitive mode of survival for at least 2,000 years. What exactly are we celebrating? And what exactly are we recognising? Apparently, we are just saying that there are people who owned the land prior to us, or before being taken over by England. If so, how many times does this need to be said? Once? Twice? Or every single time in school productions that have nothing to do with the history of Australia, nor the original people of Australia, being referenced in the production, or in fact, with the very presence of any Aboriginal people? It is said that at the failing of nations, the trivial becomes amplified as being important, and the important is minimised or rejected. This is certainly true in Australia, where virtue signalling has taken precedence over morality. If Australia really wants to bring reconciliation, it needs to recognise the true foundation of reconciliation and peace, to not only nations, but also to individuals. That true source is Jesus Christ. If schools really want to virtue signal things that actually will help the nation and their students, it should recognise Jesus Christ and the Judeo-Christian principles and foundations not only lay the groundwork for good and productive nations, but also the foundation for good and productive individuals. Democracy is useless without a moral and godly population. Without these pillars, democracy becomes tyranny through majority mob rule. In fact, it is only in Christ that the original custodians of our land can find their freedom, and by encouraging Aboriginals to take on a culture or hang on to a culture that was steeped in idolatry, wrong beliefs about the past and religion, we are laying the groundwork for continued pain and suffering. By not pointing to Christ but celebrating their satanic past, we lock them into a cycle of never-ending discouragement and foolishness.